Hello, everyone, and welcome to World Series News. It has been a momentous long weekend in New South Wales with the news of now a second and third resignation in the New South Wales Liberal National Government. Deputy Premier John Barilaro has announced he will be quitting politics, resigning his position of Deputy Premier immediately, and will be strategically gearing up for a by-election of his seat of Monero. This follows Andrew Constance, the Transport Minister, who also announced he will be quitting state politics. He will be trying to get into federal politics. This comes after Gladys Berejiklian famously quit politics last week as the ICAC, the Independent Commission Against Corruption, reveals that it will be investigating claims where Berejiklian had made some grants to somebody that she probably shouldn't have. So what we have now is the Premier of New South Wales, the Deputy Premier of New South Wales, and the Transport Minister of New South Wales all resigning from their positions, and two of them resigning from politics altogether. All three of them will take no further part in New South Wales politics very soon. This leaves a leadership replacement going on at the moment with Treasurer Dominic Perrottet, the 39-year-old, who looks in the position of becoming the next Premier of New South Wales. These are extraordinary times. It was only 2 weeks ago where Perrottet's younger brother in the Young Liberals announced that they were not backing QR codes, nor were they backing vaccine mandates, nor vaccine passports. So it stands to reason that Big Brother Dominic, if appointed Premier, should be looking to ease these restrictions and get on with the business of getting business back to work. This will also put him in better stead to realign the Liberal Party to sail forth and attempt to win the unwinnable election in March of 2023, with Labor recently installing Chris Minns as their leader, also a very young man at just 41 years of age. So what we have now is a very interesting position, but what we don't know exactly is what's going to happen next. If Perrottet gets installed as leader as early as Tuesday of this week in New South Wales, will he immediately look to change up what is going on in terms of the lockdowns with the part breakout, the hostage release, or Freedom Day, as it were, on October 11? Will he go along with that plan, or will he just drop it all and send everybody out there to get on with the business of living? If he does that, it does set up the population for a fall should we see what happened in Singapore with the explosion of cases and deaths in Singapore as they reached 82% double vaxxed. So for those of us watching very closely, there's two sides to this. Perrottet might look like the Freedom Premier coming in, which is terrific. But if he sets it up in a way to mingle everyone out there, it will be clear that they are doing that to pick on the unvaccinated as the cause. Whereas the current system that leaves a 50-day gap between October 11, where the vaccinated are allowed out, and December 1, when the unvaccinated are allowed back into society, will be the time where clearly the cases will mount up and only the unvaccinated will be able to wear the majority of the blame in that case. So we watch and we learn. Now we need to get on with a very, very serious subject, and that is Singapore. Only a week ago, I reported here on World Series News as late as September the 27th, where a catastrophe was emerging in Singapore. Just 6 days later, and that catastrophe is worsening terribly. So to do a quick recap for those of you who didn't catch that story, and you can catch it on worldseriesnews.com.au, here on Facebook or on YouTube, wherever you see this video, you can check out that story and others. However, let's go now and have a look at the figures. They're frightening. So a breakdown of the figures here in Singapore are these. The first deaths in Singapore occurred on the 20th of March 2020, where 2 deaths occurred. That was after just 108 cases of COVID. Fast forward exactly 4 months to July 20 of 2020, and the statistics are updated as these. There were now 48,035 cases, resulting in 27 deaths. This meant that Singapore was averaging a caseload of 400 a day, which averaged of a death rate of 0.21 deaths per day. So roughly every 5 days, they would lose a person to COVID, but they were getting 400 cases a day. So for every 2,000 cases that were occurring, they would have 1 death. Let's fast forward an entire year to July 20, 2021. This is now 7 months of no vaccine and 5 months of the vaccine being administered. So in Singapore at July 20 of 2021, approximately 57% of the country had now been vaccinated. They had now had 63,621 cases. They had now 36 deaths. And now with the increases, it was showing that the case numbers had dropped significantly from 400 per day down to just 43 per day. However, that rate was well sustained in the period from July to January before vaccine rates had even started. So the social distancing and the safety mechanisms were working quite well in Singapore before vaccine. The death rate was as low as 0.02. So 1 person would die every 50 days during this period. Now, here's where it gets complicated. If you jump ahead from July 20, 2021 to September 27, 2021, and this was the period where we did our last report just a week ago, the case numbers had increased in just 9 weeks from 63,621 to a whopping 89,539 cases. This meant that the caseload increase had jumped from 43 per day as late as July 20 of this year to 376 per day in just the 9 weeks from July 20 of this year. The deaths had also increased from 36 deaths to 80 deaths. So in the first 16 months of COVID for Singapore, they had only 36 deaths. In the following 9 weeks, they had 44 deaths, and the daily rate of deaths had increased to 0.63 deaths per day, or 2 people dying every 3 days, up from 1 in every 50 days. Now, at October 3, 2021, with the 82% double jab in effect in Singapore, that is 82% of that country's population of 5.93 million people have now been double vaccinated. So in the last week, case numbers in Singapore have jumped from 89,539 to 103,843. The average daily case number has jumped in the last week from 376 to 2,384. The deaths in the last week alone are 37. There has been as many deaths in Singapore in the last week as there was in the entire first 16 months of COVID. The daily death rate in Singapore now is 6.2. 6.2 people per day are dying from COVID in Singapore with a vaccine rate of 82%. This is up from just 0.02 deaths per day as late as July 20, 2021, not 10 weeks ago. Can you believe what's happening in Singapore? These numbers are catastrophic and they are only headed in one direction. Doctors in Singapore are only talking about one thing, and that's how soon can they administer a 3rd booster shot and mimic or copy what's going on in Israel, which is also a looming disaster. Stay tuned for more updates from World Series News. In further massive breaking news on World Series News today, It has been reported in the Guardian newspaper and now catching fire around the world that a brand new data dump has occurred. Like in 2016, when the Panama Papers were released, they were the biggest single release of financial information of the world's wealthiest people. A little bit later, the Paradise Papers came out, but were much smaller. But now the largest dump ever, the Pandora Papers, almost 3 terabytes of financial information has been dumped, showing the secret financial dealings and tax havens of over 100 billionaires, over 35 heads of state, including presidents, prime ministers, and heads of state, and over 300 government ministers and people in public high office, such as judges, leading ministers, mayors, military generals, all of whom have secret bank accounts all around these tax havens and go as far as over 90 countries. The countries that were mentioned and are not limited to include Britain, Kenya, Azerbaijan, Russia. There are much more. Singapore, Belize, Vietnam. These are just some of the countries mentioned in the report. What this means is that the financial secrets are being moved around the world, and since the original Panama Papers caused the shutdown of that legal firm, a lot of this money has been transferred elsewhere. They may well be the same, but there will be certainly a lot more people hiding big money around the world. And one needs to argue, if you are a member or a public official on a salary, if you are a judge, a minister, or even a prime minister, none of these people draw salaries in excess of $1 million per annum. Most would be receiving salaries between $150,000 a year and $500,000 a year. This does not make them wealthy enough to hide big money in overseas tax havens. This just doesn't make any sense. So where are they getting their investment advice? And who, in fact, is giving them the money to make these investment decisions? And how are they accumulating such big money? So the story of the Pandora Papers is a lot bigger than just a financial dump, because it opens enormous questions and enormous doors as to where we need to research next to find out who's making the money, why they're making the money, and what that money is used for, and what exactly is it buying. But as we put these 3 stories together, the looming crisis in Singapore, as they hit 82% double vaccinated, as New South Wales is just about to release itself, having hit this magical 80% barrier as expected very soon. Reports are telling us that the first jab New South Wales is at 88% and the second jab at 67%. So whilst the second jabbers are definitely slowing down, given that by December 1 they can be released into the community, but now we have the Premier and the Deputy Premier and the Transport Minister all resigning in a week, leaving it open for a brand new leader and a brand new cabinet reshuffle. This means that all bets technically are off, and we have to wait and see with bated breath which way they will fall. Will Dominic Perrottet become the next Premier? Will he install people favourites such as Tanya Davies to positions where she should lead in either small business or in health or in areas where somebody who has got the trust of the people can ask the real questions and get down to the real nitty-gritty of what's going on here? Because when we all get out there and double jabbed and these numbers start going up and not down, as we've seen in Israel, as we've seen in Singapore, as we've seen in countries all around the world, what are we going to do to provide prophylactic support to those that are unvaccinated, rather than threatening them with, as we've now seen in the Sydney Morning Herald today, whereby it is proposed to create an anti-vax tax, according to an emeritus professor from the RMIT who has a whopping 300 followers on Twitter. This is what they're proposing. This is unacceptable. We'll never take the jab. They've already taken our livelihoods, our careers. They want to take our homes and our children, and now they want to tax us into rolling up our sleeves. It ain't going to happen, and all we need to mention is that there are prophylactic support out there. So this has been An urgent update from World Series News. It is a massive news week. What we are seeing is a house of cards looking like it's going to fall. And the headline news is massive. John Barilaro, Deputy Premier, resigning today, a few days after Gladys Berejiklian, Premier of New South Wales, resigns. That leaves the state leaderless. The Transport Minister also resigned. Singapore cases are booming in terms of COVID numbers and deaths in that state, where 82% of people have been double jabbed. And now we find out that the Pandora Papers have been dumped, nearly 2 terabytes of leaked financial information, hiding the secrets of 100 billionaires, 35 heads of government and state, and over 300 public officials minimum in there, who are secretly stashing their money away from the taxation of their own countries from where this money presumably came. This is World Series News. Please enjoy our shows. Check out the new and the older versions of our editions up on our website and on our Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble pages. And please share this information widely. We are how we are going to change the world. You at home and with the news that is here and shared widely, we can bring the truth, we can see what's happening, and just like the nurses who are being told to leave their jobs, the truth is getting out quickly, and the world is changing right before our eyes. See you soon on the next edition of World Series News.